I just want to say hello to everyone and welcome to today's CMMC Compliance Alert webinar. My name is Kevin Ritchie, and I am a partner with Citrin Cooperman, specializing in cybersecurity and cyber-related compliance, and one of the firm's leaders in the risk advisory and compliance practice. Please forgive my exuberance and excitement today, but I think it's a perfect day to cover CMMC, as it just so happens to be International Data Privacy Day, which is like Christmas, New Year's, and Halloween all rolled into one for individuals like myself who have no real social life to speak of. For anyone new to the world of CMMC, this is an acronym for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and not cybersecurity mistakes made consistently, as is commonly believed. We're very excited to walk you through CMMC. It's known so that you can gain a better understanding of the certification and its importance to your business. During today's webinar, we'll be discussing what CMMC is, who needs it, the components that make up the certification, including federal contract information and controlled unclassified information, the various assessment levels, some upcoming milestones, and the possible repercussions of not being certified. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and submit them through the Q&A link within Zoom, and we'll address it for you at some point during our discussion. Joining me today is my colleague and compliance guru, Dr. Suzanne Miller. Over the last decade that I've had the privilege of working with Suzanne, she has proven herself to possess an unparalleled level of knowledge in all things compliance related, and I'm very excited that she's joining us today to walk us through the intricacies of CMMC, and ask that she please provide us with a brief introduction so we can get underway.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I have been with Citrin Cooperman for almost 8 years. And prior to that, I have over 25 years of experience in information security, regulatory compliance, and helping clients just align with their IT governance, risk management, and compliance activities for such regulatory compliance as PCI, SWIFT, HIPAA High-Tech, CMMC, and GLBA. Way back in 2017, I assisted with the Pell Institute in bringing knowledge and awareness to the manufacturing companies, not only in New Jersey, but also in Connecticut and other parts of New England. And the goal, of course, was to try to meet that deadline by December 31st, 2017 of complying with CUI compliance. And I was very happy to be a part of the program with the speaker of Dr. Ronald Ross, as some of you may know, is the one who wrote the NIST 800-171. And if you don't know what that is, trust me, you'll know by the time we're done with this presentation today. All right, thank you very much. Back to you, Kevin.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. All right, so the first question we have before we dive into CMMC is what got us to this point of needing this certification? Well, anyone who peruses headlines on a daily basis will undoubtedly run into a story covering the latest cybersecurity incident related to the United States defense contract sector. The curated examples shown here are actual headlines taken from just the last few months, demonstrating just how much the defense sector is under siege from cyber criminals. So while no business relishes new regulations, these examples reinforce the need for CMMC in order to help lock down the cybersecurity defenses of businesses within this sector. So without further ado, I will now turn things over to Dr. Miller to begin our journey through learning a little bit more about CMMC and how it can benefit your business. Suzanne?
Thank you, Kevin. So as you just saw on the last slide, the majority of those data breaches were caused by malicious actors compromising DoD vendors or suppliers and contractors just to gain access to the DoD sensitive information. And even though there are regulations and regulations have been in place for quite some time now, requiring contractors to secure their information system, it has become apparent that there are more and more breaches occurring, even though the contractors like you are supposed to have locked down your systems. So what has transpired because of that, when you take a look at the Department of Defense, the Acquisition and Sustainment Office came up with, we need a plan to be able to make sure these contractors are doing what they're supposed to be doing and securing their systems with rigorous protections that's already out there for the sensitive information of the federal contract information, which is FCI and controlled unclassified information, making sure they safeguard. So that is the program that the Department of Defense has put into place. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Kevin, next slide. Who needs CMMC? Who needs that? Well, the Department of Defense has said that if you are a contractor or a subcontractor of a contractor and you want to do business with the Department of Defense, then you have to comply with a federal acquisition requirement and a Department of Defense acquisition requirement. There's two of those. And it doesn't matter how big the contract is with the Department of Defense or how much money you do make or don't make. You must comply with those two regulations if you have FCI or CUI. Because of that contract, you must comply with being certified in CMMC. Kevin? So let's look at the components of the CMMC. All right, we talked about the two regulations. Well, as you can see, there's the FAR regulation and the DFARS regulations. Let's break each one of these apart. The FAR regulations, that's federal acquisition regulation, federal. That applies to anyone who wants to do business with the government must comply with federal acquisition. And if you are wanting to do business with the Department of Defense, you have to comply with the DFARS. So let's break them even further apart. FAR has to do with you safeguarding your information system. So a covered contractor has to comply with this, and it even specifically tells you what controls you need to have in place for it. Anyone who does business with the federal government. Now, because of all the issues that are out there with these breaches being caused by contractors, the DFARS 252.240/7012 states that you must, in your information system, not only safeguard that system, but you also need to add cyber incident reporting on top of that. So when you take a look at this, we keep talking about you have to have these systems secured to protect this information. Well, let's talk about what this information is. Next slide. FCI and CUI, that's all you have to protect, all right? But those systems have to protect it. And FCI is the data that is not intended for public release, but it's provided by the government, or it's generated for the government under a contract that you have with the Department of Defense. And it is for anyone who is doing business with the government that is either a product or a service. Now, really specific when you get to CUI, this is a new type of data that the government, not just the Department of Defense, but the government has said, we have what's known as unclassified information that needs to be safeguarded, and it also needs safeguards around how it disseminates that information. So there's a bunch of controls that need to be in place around this data. And it's required by law and regulations, and of course the government alone has a wide policy across this. And the controlled classified information, CUI, is actually listed in a register. Next slide. So let's get a little bit more into CUI. When we talk about FCI, you understand what federal contract information is, anything that's inside of it, anything that has to do with passing information around about it. But CUI is really difficult for companies that are not federal companies, but doing business with the government, trying to figure this out. If you look up in the top right-hand corner, you see a picture. That's actually the marking of a CUI. So the government looks at any information that it has that says that it's sensitive, and they put that marking on it. And so the goal is for you, when you receive information, to see if that marking's on anything that you receive, whether it's things that have to do with electronic, or things that have to do with paper, or things that have to do with plans. Anything that has that marketing on it is called CUI data. And this is not a classification of data because it encompasses everything. It even encompasses legal documents, or it could encompass notes that were sent back and forth between people. So it is truly a marking for sensitive information. You may have kind of been exposed to it before, you just didn't know it, because in the Department of Defense, there are some terms that were used. One was called FOUO, which was a marketing for official use only. There were also things that were called LES. Well, LES stands for Law Enforcement Sensitive Information. And then, of course, the big one here, which is SBU, Sensitive but Unclassified. All of those markings have been now converted into CUI data. So it's trying to keep it simple now instead of having so many different things. It's sensitive information, not classified, but it's sensitive, but it needs to be protected. And when you see a CUI marking on anything, it's to alert you, or as a contractor, it will alert anyone else that is a subcontractor of yours, or anyone in the food chain of how you are performing that contract for the government, that says there needs to be special handling of this document because it's got this marketing on it. And this marking makes it possible for them to realize, you have to abide by the law, you have to abide by the regulation, and you have to abide by the government-wide policy for CUI. All right. So now we have a little bit more understanding of what CUI is. Where do we find out what the specifics are of it? Well, when you go to dodcui.mil, they actually have their register of what CUI data is, and it will provide for you every category of the Department of Defense CUI. And when you take a look at this, you go, oh my gosh. What we have here is international agreements, nuclear, patent, privacy, all that's DOD. Actually, it may not even be in the Department of Defense that's responsible for that CUI data, but you have to comply with all CUI data of the government. It's important to remember when we talk about CUI, it's not all DOD. Even the Department of Agriculture has CUI data. So they're moving all of the government for anything that is sensitive, that needs to be protected, that we need to make sure that it is not exposed to any type of hacker, that we protect it. So I invite you to go to the site I just told you about, or you can actually go to the government site for all CUI data. And because the National Archives of Records and Administration are responsible for maintaining the listing of CUI data, you can go to archives.gov and see all of the CUI data to date. This is constantly morphing because CUI data gets created or gets generated every single day. So just be aware that the specific data may change, but the type of data that it is will probably not morph more over time because they've had a lot of opportunity to go and looking at this. All right, so let's move to the next thing. Now we know what CUI is, and we also know what CFI is. Now let's talk about the CMMC program that the Department of Defense Acquisitions and a procurement office said our non-federal vendors need to comply with this to do business with us. And so they developed this out, and they said, we have vendors that are different level. The person who makes Army socks, believe it or not, could probably have a system that is way back when, DOS 3.1. It's not on the internet, but it's got all the ways that you make socks for the Army, all the way up to the very, very top of making missiles. So they put these in 3 different levels. So level 1 is the basis. Now, let me just say this. Every one of these levels, to get to level 3, you have to do level 1, you have to do level 2, you have to do level 3. Because you only make socks and you're not on the internet, you do level 1. Because you are level 2 and the fact that you are connected to the internet, then you have to do level 1, then level 2. So realize that these are infrastructures that pile on each other. You can't choose the one you want. It's all about your information system and what you need to do to protect it based upon the contracts that you have with the DoD. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the levels, and every level, you have to put the controls in place and you have to assess that those controls are in place. In other words, every single one of those controls, you have to test it and garner evidence to support that what you are doing is correct. So level 1 is the basic safeguarding. You are required, after you do those controls, to have an annual self-assessment and an audit annual affirmation of compliance with the 15 controls. And notice that those 15 controls are found in the federal acquisition requirements. So I didn't mention all the others, but it's only 15, and that's where they are. So they're in the FAR. And next is called the broad protection of CUI. So remember, that's level 2. What are you required to do there? To either have a self-assessment, or you can hire someone who is certified in CMMC, and that particular program is not required at level 2, but you can hire this particular consultant. You have to do this assessment every 3 years, level 2, every 3 years. All right, and it's decided, if you're level 2, by the type of information, CUI or FCI, that you are processing, transmitting, or storing on your system, or your subcontractors are, because this flows downstream, so your subcontractors have to comply as well. And then number 2, an annual affirmation verifying compliance with the 110 security requirements of the NIST 800-171 reversion 2. So remember, you have to do level 1, which is an annual assessment, and level 2. Once you're compliant, then you have to reassess every 3 years. Next, this is the highest level of protection for CUI against advanced assistant persistent threats. Let me just say this. If you look at the cybersecurity framework that has been put out by the United States government, that's actually level 3, which you're going to have to do. So number 1, for level 3, you have to achieve CMMC status of full level 2. Everything in level 2 you have to do. You can't get out of any of that because it doesn't apply to your organization. You have to do all of it. The next thing you have to do is an assessment every 3 years by the Defense Contract Management Agency's Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. Yes, you will be assessed by the Department of Defense in level 3, and that happens to you every 3 years. Third thing you have to do at level 3 is provide an affirmation verifying that you are compliant with the 23 identified requirements from 800-172. So let's go to the next slide and let's get a little more in depth in this to give you by level. Let's put it all together now. Level 1, let's go down the left column. Level 1, self-assessment. Level 2, self-assessment. Level 3, self-assessment. And level 3 is a 3C PAO, and then the last one here is the one that's done by the Department of Defense. So let's start with today, level 1. If you have not done it, everybody has to do level 1. And the level 1 has 15 required FAR clause 52.204-21. You have to do those 15 requirements. How about the assessment? It has to be conducted by the company that is seeking the assessment annually, The results have to be entered into the SPRS. You cannot have a plan of action for any gaps. There can be no gaps. What's the affirmation? Well, after each assessment, it's got to go into the SPRS. After you've done level 1, if you have to do level 2, it's 110 of the NIST 800-171 requirements, and that's required by the DFARS. It has to be conducted by your organization every 3 years, and the results are entered into SPR. And you can use any consultant to help you with that. You don't have to go to the CMMC certified companies. This status will have to be validated every 3 years. You can have a plan of action. If you have items in here where there are gaps, then you are permitted to have a plan of action and milestones for that. But those gaps must be closed within 180 days. And the final status will be valid for 3 years from the conditional CMM status date. What's the affirmation? After each assessment and annually, assessment will lapse upon failure of an annual affirmation. So you are required to do it every year. But if you don't attest every year, it has lapsed and you are no longer certified at level 2. Level 2 also makes it possible for you to hire a C3 PAO to do the assessment. And that assessment is exactly like the level 2 self-assessment. And once again, if you have issues, you can have a plan of action and milestones. And then in this particular case, it's exactly the same for affirmation as if you do it yourself or hire an outside consultant. Next, the big one, level 3. There's 110 NIST 800-171s that are required for this. And you also have a new one, 800-172. And those are very, very high level controls for a cybersecurity information system. The assessment requirements is that you have to have gone through level 1 and level 2, all of them. And then you need to conduct a Department of Defense assessment every 3 years. And the results are entered in EMAS. So after that, you immediately move toward a plan of action. There's only certain things that you can have a plan of action for, and that's identified in the requirements that are coming out of the 800-171 and as well as the DFARS that ends in 7012. Each assessment annually thereafter, and the assessment will lapse upon failure of an annual affirmation, and you have to have a level 2 affirmation as well. So the mother load is level 3 here. This applies to you as a company. Where do you fit? Everybody fits in level 1. Where do you fit for level 2? It depends upon the contracts that you sign, because in the contracts it will state what level that the contractor and subcontractors need to be. Level 3, it will be stated in the contract as to whether you need to be at that level, but everybody has to be level 1. Kevin? So we're talked about where these controls are that you can get from 800-171, you can get from. It's important for you to know that everything in the United States government, when it comes to regulations, morphs over time. Cybersecurity does not stay the same. There are threat actors out there doing different things every single day, and they change these. When you comply with level 1, level 2, or level 3, always go out to NIST and look at what the requirements are. As you see the very first one up here, in the documentation out there, it specifically states 171 revision 2. Bottom line, if you read underneath it, it tells you, well, we don't have that anymore. We're going to be using this one. So they constantly change what version they want you to use. Do not fall victim to saying, well, it told me in the regs that this is what I'm supposed to do. No, you need to be proactive and go out there and look. and realize that cybersecurity and security is not an event, it's a process. So when you do your assessment and everything's in place, you don't just stop there and wait for another year. If you see or receive notice that the Department of Defense has changed some of the requirements or increased the requirements, you immediately look at that, determine how it's going to affect your company if it does, and then start to remediate to get that control in place. So when you're assessed the next year, that's required. You can't say, oh, I didn't know it. Because remember, level 2 and level 3, you can't be certified unless the controls that they are mandating are in place and operating effectively. Here's some suggested readings for you down below here. And these are DFARS. And the reason why I thought these would be kind of fun for you to look at is because the first DFARS, it's 7019, that talks about level 1. The second one, 720, that talks about the second one. And level 3, I'm sorry, and number 3 talks about level 3, 7021. And what the DoD is calling these, this is called CMMC. The very first one is crawling. The second one, when you get to level 2, you're walking. And then the third one, when you get to level 3, you're running. So they may ask you, are you still crawling? And that means, are you still working on level 1? There's a little humor in the Department of Defense. Next one, please. All right, now that you know what CMMC is, now that you know what CUI is, and now you know that there's different steps you have to go through based upon what the contract states, but everybody has to comply at level 1. What is the mandate from the Department of Defense? They are requiring that every non-federal organization that handles, didn't say store, handles FCI and CUI must achieve CMMC certification, certify at level 1, certify at level 2, or level 3. The final CMMC program regulations went into effect in December 16th. Now the regulations went into effect, okay? And the regulations apply to the Department of Defense. Those regulations come back to you and tell you that you need to be certified. All right, but the regulations apply to the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense is implementing the CMMC program in phases. There are 4 phases. The very first phase starts December 16th. And if you see here, it says that the level 1 assessment is required for all DoD solicitations as a reward of the conditions of the award. So bottom line, what they're saying here is the Department of Defense, when it issues requests for proposals after December 16th, then they must have the requirement that anyone who responds to the RFP must be level 1 CMMC certified. But caveat is, as the last, Kevin, flip back one slide.
Sure.
However, the addition of the requirements to the DoD contract, that's a lot of work to do. And the Department of Defense is saying, listen, we're not going to get to putting this in all of our contracts and all of our solicitations until pretty much after the middle of 2025. So you get a little reprieve here because they're saying we don't have all this done. So having this requirement will probably not come out in the contracts and in the RFPs until the middle of 2005. Back, please, to the next slide. So this is what you have. You have to be level 1 certified for any contract that comes out from the DoD going forward. And they told you it wouldn't probably start till 2025, the middle. Then a year later, phase 2 of the DoD implementing their CMMC program is, okay, any requirement of a contract coming out for a contractor to be certified at a level 2 starts a year after phase 1. Next, any contract that comes out that says you have to be certified at level 3. That's not for everybody. It's only those with really strong requirement for very strong security. That comes out a year after phase 2. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 affects you and your timing of being able to certify as level 1, level 2, and level 3. The 4th phase at the Department of Defense is, hey, we've got it all done. Every single contract, including options, option periods, anything that comes out that is communicating with non-federal contractors will be in full force requiring CMMC certification. Okay, let's go to the next slide. What if your company is not certified? Well, without CME certification, defense contractors risk not being eligible for any contracts with these requirements. So you heard some words like self-assess, and you heard words like that in the very, very beginning for level 1. I think it's important for you to understand that any misrepresentations in these self-assessments could lead to prosecution under the False Claims Act, underscoring the need for accurate and proactive compliance. When you do an assessment, the assessment is, what is the control? Is it in place? And is it operating effectively? Which means you have to garner artifacts to support those exact things. Is it in place and is it operating effectively? If you can't prove that, then you have misrepresented, because if you can't show proof that you've done this, then from their perspective, you haven't done it. Next slide. So this is helpful hints from Citrin Cooperman. We've done quite a few of these, especially after we did all the Pell, oh goodness, we did dog and pony shows helping the Pell Institute. And also too, we worked with NJMEP as well, really trying to help these small manufacturers try to comprehend what needed to be done. So this is the compliance roadmap that we have used for them to try to keep it simple. And as they say, this is an elephant, and how to eat an elephant. So here we go. Number 1, we really want to make sure that our clients understand what the requirements are. Remember, you are responsible for security. You can't outsource. You can't outsource compliance. You can't give it to somebody else and say you fix it. No, you are responsible for that data, and you are responsible for the controls going in place and operating effectively for those. So number 1, if you have a contract or if you have an idea of what's coming down for you, what level is it going to be? Because that's going to decide year 2, year 3. But let's talk about year 1. You know right now, if you haven't done anything, you are a level 1. Okay? Next, now that you know where you're going to start, the next thing becomes to conduct a readiness assessment. And that means, let's just call it a gap analysis. That just means looking at, first one is 15 controls, looking at all those 15 controls, and do you have them in place or do you not have them in place? All right, and if there are gaps in it, you got to fix it. So develop a plan of action and milestones, even though you can have that to work to the end, but you can't do in level 1 a PMO and say, okay, I have a PMO, I'm done. No, the PMO is to guide you as to what you need to fix and how you need to fix it. And then the most important thing is for you to fix it and make sure those security controls are in place. And for every control you have, you got to have the policies and procedures. Guess what? That's what first part of CMMC is, policies and procedures. Then you schedule your certification audit. And if you're doing a level 1, they call it an audit, but it's really an assessment. And so it's important for you to realize that once you got everything in place and you go through and you say, it's in place, it's in place. You've got everything that you need all the way down, whatever those questions are. Do you have a policy? Yes. Do you have procedures? Yes. Is the control in place? Yes. Is it operating effectively? Give me an example of a policy in your Active Directory that shows certain things. Next, after you schedule that, and hopefully you'll pass, because that's the point of this, and that you complete all of those, then from that point on, it's exactly what I said before. Compliance is business as usual. If something comes up, you make sure that you have a control in place to monitor that. It may even be a subset of one that you already have. So constantly monitor, making sure that those controls are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then any information that you receive from the DoD or the CMMC is that you update those standards. All right. So once again, at Citrin Cooperman, we found that our roadmap really made it compartmentalized and simple to get to the end game of being certified in your level. All right. Hey, Kevin, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
All right, Suzanne, thank you so much. All right, for our last couple of minutes, just really want to touch on how Citrin Cooperman can help a business that maybe they don't have the resources in-house or the expertise to kind of get this over the finish line. So this is something where we can certainly come in and supplement your team. We can help educate your organization on the importance of CMMC. We can identify compliance gaps and provide guidance in closing those gaps. We can share guidance with you related to developing policies and procedures. We can assist in developing a POAM for you. We can also provide intuitive status reports that helps score your current CMMC readiness and provides, a description of the next steps needed in the process to achieve your certification. So again, we can come in and work with your team. And from a pricing perspective, if you have a pretty good handle on your CMMC and you're just looking for another set of eyes, we can gear that project towards just coming in and doing a review of what you have and a little bit of cleanup. Or if you're kind of a little overwhelmed or don't have the resources to tackle this, we can come in and put boots on the ground and really help you get this over the finish line. And very quickly, for our last 60 seconds here, we've talked about CMMC. We can certainly help in that area. Just a few other areas where our team can again come in and help you with your compliance goals is that, for example, we are a qualified security assessor company, or a QSAC. So for any business that accepts credit card payments and needs to meet the requirements of the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, we can certainly come in and help validate that compliance and help get you across the finish line there as well. We also have the expertise in the realm of HIPAA and high-tech privacy and security rules. So if you need some assistance there, as well as the New York SHIELD Act and other state data privacy and security regulations, again, we're standing by to help in any way that you may need to meet those goals. And then finally, for anyone in the banking industry, we can also help with the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, or SWIFT, independent CSP assessments as well. That's something that Suzanne is very well versed in and can help your organization. And then the final item that I'd like to touch on is that in addition to the compliance, we also do a lot of cybersecurity projects as well for our clients that sometimes intersect with obviously the compliance work. We have our proprietary score report cybersecurity assessment, a very affordable way to gauge your cybersecurity preparedness and hygiene. We also can provide penetration and vulnerability testing and spear phishing simulations through our certified ethical hackers that are on our team. We can provide cybersecurity awareness training. We can develop your IT and security policies and procedures. And in the event, the worst case scenario, that there's some type of breach response that you need assistance with, we can certainly help in that regard as well. And just a very quick look at that score report, again, very affordable. It also covers CMMC in terms of if you're looking to just kind of get your hands around what CMMC level you need or where you stand there, we can certainly help. It's a very intuitive and graphical based report. So this way it's geared towards the C-suite ownership and management, not necessarily towards the IT recipient. So again, it kind of cuts through a lot of the techno jargon and gets right to, from a business perspective, what you need to know. We also provide benchmarking within that report, so you can do a comparative of your cybersecurity readiness compared to the last 100 score reports that we've completed. And then in the back end of the report, we get into the granularities of your cybersecurity readiness. So basically describing the risks, why they're a risk from both a business and an IT perspective, as well as providing recommendations on how to quickly and effectively address them. So that brings us within 60 seconds of the end of our webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for their time today, for joining us on today's CMMC webinar. And if anyone has any questions or would like to contact us to learn a little bit more or to potentially talk to us about coming in and assisting your team, please reach out to myself or Dr. Miller here using the contact information found on this slide. And we would be happy to set up a call with you and talk through how we can help you. So with that said, I'd like to thank everyone very much for your time today. Have a great International Data Privacy Day, and we look forward to talking with you again soon. Thank you.